The cozy little restaurant buzzed with the warmth of soft jazz and the gentle clinking of silverware. It wasn't an extravagant place, just a small family-owned eatery tucked away on a quiet street, the kind of spot where the waiters knew regulars by name, and the air always carried the comforting scent of home-cooked meals. At a corner table, an elderly couple sat, hands gently intertwined. James and Margaret had been together for over 50 years, their love weathering decades of highs and lows. This night was special, their wedding anniversary. It wasn't their usual routine to dine out, but James had saved up just enough to bring Margaret here, hoping to give her a simple yet memorable evening. They shared quiet laughter as they reminisced about the past, their eyes twinkling with love and history. As the waiter approached with the bill, James reached into his pocket, his fingers trembling slightly. He pulled out his wallet, but as he unfolded it, his heart sank. His hands shook as he thumbed through the few crumpled bills and coins inside. A deep knot formed in his stomach. It wasn't enough. Margaret noticed his hesitation. She reached over and gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. Her touch warm but understanding. "It's all right, love," she whispered, trying to ease the panic in his eyes. James swallowed hard. He had miscalculated. The rising costs of everything, even a simple meal, had caught him off guard. He felt embarrassed, ashamed even. He looked around the restaurant, hoping no one noticed his predicament. But in a place this small, it was hard to go unnoticed. A few eyes turned toward them, some filled with curiosity, others with quiet sympathy. The waiter, a young man with a kind face, noticed the couple's distress and hesitated. He didn't want to make them feel uncomfortable, but he also had a job to do. "Take your time," he said gently, stepping away to give them a moment. James lowered his head, feeling the weight of the moment press down on him. This wasn't how he wanted their anniversary to be. He had promised Margaret a nice evening, a break from their everyday struggles. Instead, he was about to embarrass them both in front of strangers. Then, from across the room, a voice spoke up. It was deep, yet gentle, carrying an unmistakable presence. "I've got this," the man said simply. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the restaurant as people realized who had just spoken. Sitting at a nearby table was none other than Keanu Reeves, the Hollywood star, known for his humility and kindness, had been quietly enjoying his meal when he noticed the couple's predicament. Without hesitation, he had stepped in. James looked up, startled. He recognized the man instantly, but his mind struggled to process what was happening. "Oh no, sir, that's too much," he stammered, shaking his head. He couldn't accept such a gesture, not from someone like him. But Keanu simply smiled, his eyes kind. "It's my pleasure," he said warmly. "Happy anniversary." The restaurant fell into a hushed silence. Margaret's eyes welled with tears, and James, for the first time in years, felt completely overwhelmed by someone's generosity. But what happened next took everyone by even greater surprise. James and Margaret sat frozen, unable to fully grasp what had just happened. A moment ago, they had been trapped in a quiet panic, unsure how to cover the cost of their anniversary meal. Now, the world-famous Keanu Reeves had not only noticed them but had stepped in without hesitation. It felt surreal, almost like a dream. The restaurant, which had been filled with soft conversation and clinking glasses, was now caught in a hush. People exchanged glances, some whispering in amazement, others simply staring, waiting to see what would happen next. The young waiter, still holding the bill, seemed equally stunned. He looked at Keanu, then at James, uncertain of how to proceed. James cleared his throat, trying to find the right words. That's very kind of you, sir," he said, his voice shaky. But Keanu held up a hand, cutting him off gently. Please, he said, his tone warm but firm. It's a celebration, isn't it? Let me do this for you. Margaret, still holding on to James's hand, wiped a tear from her eye. She wasn't used to this kind of generosity. Life had never been easy for them, but they had always managed. Sometimes just barely, but they managed. This was different. This was kindness without expectation, something they hadn't experienced in a long time. The waiter hesitated for only a moment, before nodding, realizing there was no point in arguing. He took the bill and walked away, leaving behind a room still filled with quiet awe. James shifted in his seat, still unsure how to process everything. He was a proud man, always had been. He had worked hard all his life. Long shifts at a factory, then later odd jobs after retirement, just to keep up with rising costs. Accepting help, especially in such a public way, was difficult for him. He felt a mix of emotions: relief, gratitude, but also a deep sense of humility. Margaret, sensing his inner struggle, squeezed his hand. It's all right, she whispered. Just say thank you. James took a deep breath, then looked at Keanu, who was still watching them with that same easy smile. Thank you, James said, his voice filled with sincerity. Really, this means more than you know. Keanu nodded. No need to thank me, he said. You two deserve to enjoy your night. A quiet murmur of admiration spread through the restaurant. People weren't just impressed that a celebrity had done something generous. It was the way he had done it. No cameras, no grand gestures, just a simple act of kindness. But as the moment settled, something unexpected happened. From across the restaurant, a man in his 40s, dressed in a crisp suit, stood up. His face was tight, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something troubled. He stepped forward, hesitating for only a second before speaking. I don't mean to interrupt, he said, his voice steady but laced with something deeper. But I need to say something. The room turned toward him. James and Margaret looked up, confused. Even Keanu gave a small nod, silently encouraging him to go on. The man swallowed hard. I watched what just happened, and it hit me, he continued. You see, my parents... He stopped, shaking his head slightly, as if steadying himself. My parents were like you. They worked their whole lives, did everything right, and still struggled in the end. And His voice wavered just slightly. I didn't help them the way I should have. A heavy silence settled in the room. The man's confession felt raw, as if it had been sitting inside him for years. James and Margaret exchanged a glance, their own experiences echoing in his words. I was so caught up in my career, my own life, that I didn't realize how hard things were for them. The man admitted, by the time I did, it was too late. His eyes dropped to the floor for a second, before lifting again, filled with regret. Watching you two tonight, and seeing what Keanu just did, it made me realize something. He paused, taking a shaky breath before reaching into his pocket and pulling out his wallet. He took out a few crisp bills and placed them gently on the table in front of James. Please, he said, consider this a gift, not just for tonight, but for whatever you need. I know it's not about the money. It's about respect, and you deserve that. Gasps rippled through the restaurant. This wasn't just a story of a kind celebrity anymore. It had become something bigger, something deeply human. A moment of connection between strangers, tied together by shared experiences, regrets, and kindness. James looked down at the money, his vision blurring. His pride told him to refuse, but his heart told him something else. Maybe, just maybe, This wasn't about charity. Maybe it was about something much deeper. A lesson, a moment of understanding. Margaret reached over, her voice soft but steady. Sometimes, the best thing we can do is accept kindness, she said, for ourselves. And for those who need to give it. James swallowed hard, then slowly nodded. He looked at the man, then at Keanu, and gave a small trembling smile. Thank you, he whispered again, and with that, something shifted in the air. The tension melted, replaced by something rare and beautiful, a shared moment of humanity. But even as the restaurant slowly returned to its usual rhythm, one question lingered in everyone's minds. The restaurant slowly returned to life, but something had changed. It was no longer just another evening. Something rare had happened. Strangers had connected, not through words alone, but through shared emotions, unspoken regrets, and acts of kindness. James sat still, his mind racing, his heart full. He had spent years carrying the quiet burden of making ends meet, of always being the provider. And yet, tonight, in the most unexpected way, he had been reminded that kindness was not a sign of weakness, but of humanity. Keanu Reeves watched the scene unfold with a quiet smile. He had seen many moments like this, small but profound gestures, that rippled beyond the people involved. But even he wasn't expecting what happened next. A woman, likely in her 50s, stood up from another table. She had been sitting silently, listening, her eyes filled with something deeper than admiration. "I'm sorry," she said, stepping forward hesitantly. I have to say this." She turned to James and Margaret, her voice steady but emotional. "My parents were like you, and I lost them before I had the chance to truly appreciate everything they did for me. Seeing you tonight, it makes me wish I could have one more moment with them." James and Margaret looked at her, their expressions soft with understanding. She turned toward the man who had stepped forward earlier. "You're not alone in your regrets," she said. "But maybe, just maybe, this is a reminder for all of us that we still have time to appreciate the people we love, to give when we can, and to never take moments like these for granted." A quiet murmur of agreement passed through the room. The weight of her words settled in, pressing against the hearts of everyone there. Then, something truly unexpected happened. The restaurant's owner, an older man with kind eyes, walked over and placed a gentle hand on James's shoulder. "You two are family here now," he said with a smile. "Dinner's on us, not just tonight, but any time you visit." James blinked in disbelief. Margaret covered her mouth, overcome with emotion. "Oh, we couldn't," she started, but the owner shook his head. "This isn't charity," he said warmly. "It's gratitude. For all the years you've worked, sacrificed, and given to the world, it's our turn to give back." The room filled with soft applause, not the kind meant for spectacle, but the kind that comes from genuine admiration. People weren't just moved by the kindness of one man anymore. They had become part of something bigger, something rare in today's world. A shared moment of compassion, where no one was a stranger. Keanu, ever humble, gave a small nod and leaned toward James. "Looks like you have a whole lot of people who appreciate you," he said with a smile. "And that's how it should be." James, overwhelmed, let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head. "I never expected any of this," he admitted. "I just wanted to give my wife a nice dinner." Margaret looked at him, eyes filled with love. "And you did," she whispered. "More than you'll ever know." As the night wrapped up, people, left with lighter hearts, touched in a way they hadn't expected when they walked in. Some exchanged numbers, promising to check in on each other. Others simply left with a new perspective, a reminder to be more present, to appreciate what they had. and to show kindness whenever possible. James and Margaret, now guests of honor, in a restaurant they had only planned to visit once, walked out into the cool night air, hand in hand. They had come in feeling the weight of their struggles, but they left feeling something entirely different, hope. And as Keanu Reeves slipped out quietly, as he often did, he smiled to himself. Because in the end, it was never about grand gestures or fame. It was about the little moments, the ones that truly mattered.